All right, guys, welcome back to Arraylist Part 2. Now, at this point, we're going to talk about some other features of Arraylist. As you might expect, just like how every time you want to go through an array, you need a loop. Every time you want to go through an array list, you also need a loop. So let me give some examples of what this will look like. So when you loop through an entire array list, the setup should look pretty similar because the count is the same as everything else. You start at 0, you go while you're less than the size. So that's movies.size. I'll put it in a comment here, but at this point, my array list in movies is Happy Gilmore, then Citizen Kane, and then Star Wars. So if I want to access like the element in spot I is just going to be movies.getI, and that's how I would look at every individual element that's inside here. Okay, so let me go ahead and talk about a couple other things here. Let's give an example. So let's say as we loop through, we want to count how many movies have an E in the title. So I'm going to set up some int count to be 0. And I'm going to loop through and look at each individual element. So I'm going to ask, okay, if movies.getI. Okay, now this is a string. So movies.getI is a string. So I can call string methods on movies.getI. Movies is an array list, but movies.getI is actually a string. So I'm going to just call index of and see if there's an E anywhere in there. And if there's an E anywhere in there, then that index of should be greater than or equal to 0. And if that's the case, then I'll just do count plus plus. Okay, and if that happens, then this will count how many of these have an E in the title, and hopefully that should be 2. Okay, so that's how you will loop through and check this, and sure enough, we got 2. Excellent. So that's how you access an individual element, and this is how you loop through pretty much every time. Now I wanted to show you some other things. So one of the things we talked about is you cannot make an array list of ints or doubles or booleans or any type of primitive variable. And let me show you what happens. If you try and set up an array list of int, it'll just give you a weird error. So we'll say not gonna work equals new array list of int. But when you try and compile this, it gives you this error and it says unexpected type. It required a reference. That means it referenced some type of object, but it found an integer. But what there actually is built in is Java has object versions of primitive types. They're capitalized like all objects are. So there is an integer, a double with a D, capital D, a capital B Boolean, and that sort of stuff. So, for example, you could make an array list of, say, integers. Say I wanted to keep, say I wanted to keep all your scores for some assignment in an array list. I could do it like this. Array list of integer. Okay. And then I could just do what I normally do. So I could add in, someone got a 90, and then someone got a 24, and then someone got a 108, like a big nerd. Okay, probably Malachi or something. So then when you want to go ahead and print out the variables, it still works. Like Java will automatically turn these numbers into integer objects, and same with doubles or booleans. So it'll work out nicely, and that's a way that you can store numbers in an array list that might be really useful to you. Okay, now you can also, of course, create your own variable types and add them. So, for example, I took the date program. As you guys remember, we had this date class several labs ago where we had a month, a day, and a year. Now, if you want to create an array list of dates, it's not too much extra work. In fact, it's no real extra work. So you set up your array list of date objects. Let's call this my calendar. And I'll make this a new array list of date objects. And don't forget it's a constructor, so I need the parentheses there. Make sure you're putting this on both sides. That's going to kind of help you avoid errors and issues in the future, the arrow date. Okay, so I can do calendar.add, and I could add in my birthday, so new date 9/28/1986. Okay. Or, of course, I could just set up a new date, so I could set up my son's birthday, which I'm pretty sure is 12/28/2019. He escaped the worst year ever, just barely. And then we could add in my son. Now, here's a cool thing also. Printing out an array list of dates calls the toString for that class. So it'll automatically print out those dates as you would expect, which I think is pretty sweet. So if you try and just print out the calendar, it'll be like, okay, I'm going to print out basically all the dates, and there is a toString for dates, so it'll print them out nicely in that form, which I think is like really cool. Okay, so that's a useful one. One of the other questions you probably have is, could I make a method that inputs and outputs an array list? Of course you can. So let's just give a few examples here. Let's say, I don't know, I'm going to have a method. This method will go through an array list of doubles and return true if all of those doubles are negative. And then otherwise, it returns false if there's at least one negative. Okay, so let's set this up. So it's going to be public static. All right, it's going to return a Boolean. And it's going to call this like all neg. And it's going to input an array list of integers. Doubles. Let's call it nums. Okay, so when I loop through this, let's see what this would look like. All right, so I'm going to loop through, of course. So I'm going to loop through. For int I equals 0, I is less than nums.length. Oh, it's nums.size because it's an array list. That's important. You know, if you do .length, you'll figure it out right away because you'll just see it doesn't even compile. Well, that was pretty stupid. Okay. But I'll show you in just a minute. It doesn't compile. It just gives you this error, can't find the .length, and that's just an indication that you need to use .size. Okay, so that's how you use nums, this loop, in .size. Now, let's see. I'm going to return true, but only if all are negative. So, just like with an array, if I find a single one that's not negative, so a single one that's positive, then I'm going to return false right away. So if I see one number that is not negative, I'm going to return false right away. But I don't want to return true until I've checked every single one. So I can't return true until I've checked all of them. Okay, so if I take a look at if nums.getI is greater than or equal to 0, then in that case, I'll go ahead and I'll return false right away. If everything is negative, I get to the end. That looks good. Okay, let's talk about testing. So when you go to test this, you might wonder, okay, can I call this method and type in an array list of double here? The answer is no, you can't. Don't even try, it won't work. So you're going to have to test these methods from main. So you can't right-click test with arraylist. You got to set it up and call via main, or some other method, of course. So I'm going to set up an array list of doubles. Let's call this my tester equals new array list of doubles. Okay, and then I'm going to add things to it. So I'm going to do tester.add, and I'll just put in some numbers. Okay, so maybe we'll see if I can trick them by starting with a negative, and then I'll do tester.add, maybe another negative, and then I'll do tester.add, and then okay, and then I'll throw in a positive, so it should return false. And then I'll do tester.add and put, finish with a negative 12 or whatever. That's like most of your grades. So, oh, it doesn't like that they're ints. Okay, well, let's make them. We'll do that to really get their goat. Okay. So anyway, when I want to call this, okay, so let's see. I call the method in this class. So I'm going to call all neg, and I'm going to send to this tester. Now, I want to see what that prints out, of course. So I'm going to put this inside a print line. Hello, Cassie. So I'll print out all neg tester, and that's going to just print out whatever this method returns, which hopefully will be false. So it's a little more work to test these methods. You'll have to do it through main, but it did work for me. It's not too bad. Okay. Now, of course, I could set up a method that also returns an array list. So let's say this method will input an array list of string objects and return an array list of integer objects showing where the letter E first appears in that string. We'll use index up for that. So if I send it, for example, like hello, and then I send it like they, and then I send it something without something, it should return, okay, so here the E is in spot 1, in they the E is in spot 2, in boo the E is not anywhere, so I'll put in a -1. That's what I'm looking for, like where does the first E occur I'll make that a there so it's clear. Where does the first E occur in each string? And then return that as an array list. So when you're doing a method like this, a public static, it's returning an array list of integers, and I'm calling this like, okay, E locations, and it inputs an array list of strings. Oops, we need to call that words. All right, so when that's happening, then what you can do is, let's see, first thing you should do on a method like this, your first step should be to declare the array list. A lot of people forget this, but the first thing you need to do is set up your array list of integers to be a new array list. I need to name it too. Nums equals new array list of integers. That should be really your first step, is to set up the list that you're going to go through. Now, okay, now I'm going to loop through words. So I'm going to do for int I is 0, I is less than words dot size, I plus plus. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the location of the E in words dot get I. All right, so let's see. I'm going to do words dot get I. Well, actually, okay, so let's do this. Let's get the location first. So the location is going to be words dot get I dot index of, and find the E. So that's going to show me where the E appears. And then I'll add that in here. So then I'm going to do nums.add. And because I'm going through forward, it's going to keep the same order. So I'll just do nums.add that loc. And then what I'll have to do, of course, is after I'm done, then I'll return the nums. But again, your first step should be to create the list that you're going to return. And your last step should be return that after you fill that up. Okay, so once you've gone ahead, when you want to test something like this, like let's go ahead and test it with my movies. So when I set up the movies before, it was Happy Gilmore, Citizen Kane, Star Wars. So we got an E near the end, an E it looks like in spot 5, and then here we have no E, so it should be -1. So we could test this again. So I could say, okay, system.out.println, I'm going to call this elokes, and I'm going to send it my movie. So that's how I can test it. So again, I'm calling the method in main like so. And when I want to do that, I'll be able to do it and run it, and we'll see. Yeah, it gave me something at the end, 5 and -1. Perfect. So it did what I expected. Okay, great. So that's how you're going to run these type of methods. Again, trying to like right click and do you can't type in array list of strings. That's not going to work. You're going to have to test them in. The last thing I want to show you, if you're curious, and I'll link this too, there is, an wrong one, Jesus. There is the source code for Arraylist. So if you want to look through and look at like what is in public class Arraylist, it's pretty messy. It's got this extends and implements, which is kind of weird. We'll talk about next semester, but you could do it. And if you're curious, basically the main thing that's in an array list is the instance variable. It's just an array. There's an array of objects that gets filled up, but it has a constructor. You can search for like some of the other methods, the .add, the .remove. They're all in here. There's a contains method. So the source code is out there if you want to take a look. All right. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed Arraylist, and I'll see you guys soon.